When we were 13 years old, boredom was more dangerous than fear. We lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing ever really happened. Identical houses lined the streets like copies of the same mistake. Trimmed lawns, silent evenings, and parents who thought they knew where their kids were at all times. Back then, there were fewer houses than there are now. In between the streets and backyards, there were patches of woods, dark, uneven, forgotten spaces where kids weren't supposed to go. That was exactly why we went there. Saturday nights were ours. No school the next day, no responsibilities, just the restless energy of kids who didn't understand consequences yet. That's when we started ding-dong ditching. It wasn't creative. It wasn't impressive. But it made us feel alive. There were 5 of us. For the sake of this story, I'll call them Mark, James, Matt, and then there was me. Mark and James were always the bold ones. They were the runners, the bell ringers, the ones who liked the rush of standing on someone's porch, pressing the doorbell and hearing it echo through a stranger's house. Matt and I were different. We were the planners, the hiders, the ones who scoped out bushes, fences, trees, any place where shadows were thick enough to swallow us whole. We had a system. One of them would ring the bell. The rest of us would already be hiding 5 or 6 houses away. A door would open. A confused or angry man would step out. Maybe he'd yell. Maybe he'd curse. Then he'd go back inside. We'd laugh quietly. Always quietly. Most of the reactions blurred together. Men stepping onto their stoops in slippers. Some shouting threats they didn't mean. One guy yelled he was calling the cops. That was our cue to scatter, sprinting down the street until our lungs burned, regrouping a block away. Hearts pounding, grinning like idiots. That night was no different. At first, after one particularly angry homeowner threatened the police, we ran to the next block over, a block we didn't usually mess with. That block felt different. The houses were older, more worn down, lawns overgrown, paint peeling. It was quieter there, not in a peaceful way, but in the way a place feels when people keep to themselves. Across from the very first house on that block was a patch of woods. Not a neat little cluster of trees, but dense, tangled, wild. The kind of woods where the ground dips unexpectedly and branches claw at your clothes. To us, it looked like the perfect hiding spot. The house itself didn't look welcoming. Tall grass choked the yard. A ratty old car sat in the driveway under a faded cover, like it hadn't moved in years. The windows were dark. Mark volunteered to ring the bell. He crossed the street, confident as ever. He barely made it halfway back before the door opened. Too fast. A man stepped out. He was huge, at least 6 feet tall, maybe taller, thick, stocky build. The kind of man who looked strong without trying. His face was twisted in anger instantly, like he'd been waiting for an excuse. Unlike the others, he didn't hesitate. He stormed across his front yard, yelling, checking behind bushes, circling trees. His voice wasn't empty threats. It was raw, furious. We crouched in the woods, laughing quietly like idiots, convinced this was just another overreaction. Eventually, he went back inside. The porch light shut off. The street went still again. Mark waited, checked the windows. Then, against all common sense, he ran back up and rang the bell again. Even from the woods, I remember thinking, "You're pushing it." This time, Mark didn't come straight back. He ran around the side of the house instead. The door opened almost immediately. And this time, the man stepped out holding a rifle. Every single one of us felt it at the same time. That cold, sinking oh shit feeling that drains the humor out of everything. The man moved slower now, deliberate. He checked every place again and then places he hadn't before. Behind the car, behind trees, corners of the yard. Then he stopped. right in the middle of his lawn. He stood there, perfectly still, thinking. Then his head turned and stopped. He was looking directly at the woods, at us. We froze in the shadows, our hearts pounding like war drums. The rifle gleamed in the dim light, reflecting a menacing glare that seemed almost intentional. Mark was somewhere near the front door, creeping carefully, but from where we were hidden, it looked like he was trapped in a spotlight, vulnerable and alone. The man didn't move at first. He just stood there, staring into the darkness where we were hiding. And then, ever so slowly, he began to step forward, each movement deliberate. We shrank lower into the underbrush, trying to make ourselves as small as possible, but the crunch of leaves beneath our shoes betrayed us. The man's eyes followed, not searching, not confused. He knew exactly where we were. We exchanged terrified glances. There was no plan, just panic, pure instinct. We started to back away slowly, but the man advanced faster than seemed humanly possible. Our lungs burned, adrenaline surged, and the woods that had seemed so safe a moment ago now felt like a death trap. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw Mark sprint across the yard, shouting at us to run. That yell was the signal. Whatever courage we had left disappeared in an instant. We bolted, dodging trees, jumping over roots, barely keeping our balance. Behind us, the rifle cracked a warning shot, more a shout of dominance than an actual attempt to kill, but it was enough to keep us running. We ran like animals, limbs burning, lungs screaming, adrenaline making our tiny legs move faster than they should have. The man followed, but he wasn't clumsy. Every step was precise. Every shadow, every dip in the land, he navigated with terrifying accuracy. Mark led the way to a block farther down, a street that offered more houses, more cover. We didn't look back. We didn't speak. Our only thought was survive. Finally, we made it across the street to a house we recognized as safe. Mark yelled at us to get inside. We slammed the door behind us, hearts pounding, sweat and dirt covering our faces. The man didn't follow. He stopped at the edge of the yard, rifle lowered, just watching. And then he disappeared into his house, leaving an echoing silence behind us. We never reported what happened. Who would believe it? Who would understand the terror of a man stalking children across a suburban yard with a rifle in the dead of night? We whispered the story to a few close friends, and that was it. Even now, decades later, that night is burned into my memory. The feeling of being hunted. The instinctive fear that comes when you realize someone knows exactly where you are. Exactly how vulnerable you are. The next morning, sunlight brought relief, but also an eerie realization. We had been lucky. Lucky that the man stopped. Lucky that we ran. Lucky that no one got hurt. Years later, whenever I walk past suburban streets, I remember that night. I think about those woods, that house, and the man whose rage could have ended us in seconds. And I remember something else too, how fear can sharpen your senses, can make you alive in ways nothing else ever does. After surviving the night in the woods, I thought I had left fear behind. I was wrong. A few years later, I moved into a small college house that my parents were paying for. It was modest, nothing fancy, nothing that would hint at danger. For the first few days, everything seemed normal. I unpacked my things, set up my little study corner, and settled into what I thought would be a quiet semester. But then it started. It was a rainy Saturday, the kind of day where clouds hang low, the sky a uniform shade of gray, and the world feels damp and heavy. I had been watching TV for hours, letting the rain be my only company. And that's when I heard it, a scrape across the floor. At first, I laughed it off. Probably just a stray piece of furniture moving, or a branch scraping the window. but the sound came again and again. Curiosity mixed with unease. I grabbed a pillow, my makeshift weapon, and crept toward the kitchen. There, in the middle of the dark room, was a box of Cheerios spilling across the floor. Hundreds of tiny O's scattered, covering the tile like a breakfast massacre. I had no idea how it had fallen. I had not touched it. Nobody had been in the house. I cleaned it up, shaken but trying to laugh at my own paranoia. Then came the creak. From the kitchen table. Someone, or something, walking across the floorboards above me. My heart thumped violently. I looked up. Empty kitchen. Empty house. And yet I knew I was not alone. That night, the rain continued. I tried to sleep, but every sound, the wind against the windows, the shifting of the old house, the faintest groan of wood, made me jump. It wasn't until the next rainy day that things escalated. I woke up feeling as though I had been poisoned with sleep. Weak. Dizzy. Nauseous. The gray rain pouring outside made the house feel like a cage. I kept the TV on for background noise and stayed in bed as long as possible. But then came the sounds from the attic. 3, 4 distinct thuds. Slow, deliberate, rhythmic. Someone walking above me. My bedroom had a pull-down attic door. I had never been up there. Not by choice. Summoning courage I didn't feel, I grabbed a baseball bat and climbed the stairs. The attic was dark, cluttered with old boxes, remnants of previous owners. Nothing alive. Nothing moving. Only shadows and the dust of decades. I climbed down, unsettled, but tried to convince myself it was nothing. That night, the sounds returned. Louder. Closer. Someone, or something, was up there, waiting. I pulled the attic door down again, bat in hand, and then I heard it, a child giggling. In the pitch black. A sound that froze my blood. Laughter, high-pitched, playful in its tone and utterly wrong. It came from nowhere, yet filled the entire attic. I felt my stomach drop, my chest tighten, and my legs refuse to obey me. I ran, out of the house, into the cold rain. I called my dad, shaking, crying, explaining as best as I could. He came immediately, and I left that house behind the next day. To this day, I cannot explain what happened in that attic. But I know one thing, it was not human. After surviving my college house nightmare, I thought I had seen it all. I was wrong. A few years later, I worked as a maid for an elderly woman named Mel. She lived in a massive old house on a 2-acre property, surrounded by woods in 3 directions. The road was lonely, the kind that made you feel cut off from the world. The house itself was ancient, mostly wood, dark, creaky floors that groaned with every step. The air smelled of candle wax and something older, something decayed. Mel was in her 70s, small, frail, yet her presence had a weight, a quiet command that made me wary instantly. She never smiled. She barely spoke. She would instruct me to clean, to dust, to sweep, but always with a cold, almost unnatural precision. One weekend she asked me to stay overnight. She went upstairs after giving me instructions, do not go into the basement. Ever. I didn't think much of it at first, but as night fell, the house changed. The shadows deepened. The wood groaned more audibly. And then I heard footsteps outside my bedroom door. Slow, deliberate. Step, step, step. I told myself it was Mel going to the bathroom, but then the doorknob rattled. She paused. I held my breath. The doorknob turned slowly, just enough to make me feel like she was peering in. Then silence. I waited. Too long. Curiosity and terror battled inside me. I had to see the basement. I grabbed a flashlight and tiptoed down the stairs. The door loomed before me, heavy and ancient. My hand trembled as I pushed it open. At the bottom of the stairs, I froze. Two decaying corpses sat in old wooden chairs. Men, their faces pale and rotting, wigs on their heads. One had a beret. A bug crawled across one of them. My stomach churned. The smell hit me. Death, decay, something wrong. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, from above. Mel was coming. I dove behind a couch just as she descended the stairs. Whispered my name, knife in hand. I could see her shadow stretching across the basement floor. I ran, up the stairs, grabbed my backpack. She followed, screaming my name, the knife glinting, heart pounding, lungs burning. I burst through the front door into the cold night. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove as fast as I could. Rain lashed the windshield. Mel stood at the house, staring, silent now, knife at her side. I never looked back. I never returned. I never gave her my contact information. And to this day I have no idea who the corpses were. Her husband? Another? It didn't matter. That house. That woman. The terror lingered long after I escaped. It all began in the woods behind my childhood neighborhood. I was 14, and my friends and I, Tom, Derek, and Leo, had made a habit of exploring places we shouldn't. There was an abandoned campsite a few miles outside town, tucked between dense forest and a forgotten creek. The locals whispered about it, said it had been used decades ago, then shut down after mysterious disappearances. Of course, that only made it more exciting to us. We set out one Friday evening, backpacks loaded with snacks, flashlights, and a couple of walkie-talkies. The sun was dipping behind the trees, painting the forest floor in dark orange and brown shadows. The air was heavy, humid from recent rain, carrying the smell of wet leaves and soil. The path to the campsite was overgrown, narrow, and twisted. It took us almost an hour to reach the clearing where the old cabins stood. Most were just skeletal remains, shattered wood, broken windows, roofs sagging with rot. One cabin, however, was strangely intact. Its paint was faded, but the structure stood firm. We set up a small campfire near the edge of the clearing, careful not to be seen from the old cabin. As darkness swallowed the woods, the temperature dropped. The sounds changed. Owls called out. The wind whispered through the branches. And then we heard it, a low scratching sound, coming from inside the intact cabin. Curiosity won over caution. Tom, always the boldest, crept toward the cabin door. I followed, flashlight in hand, heart hammering in my chest. The floorboards groaned under each step. The scratching stopped. I peered inside. The cabin was empty, yet the air smelled like something had died there recently. The walls were scratched, deep gouges, as if someone or something had tried to claw its way out. The faint outline of footprints, too large for a normal human, were pressed into the dust covering the floor. We exchanged glances. Derek whispered, "We shouldn't be here." But it was too late. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the corner of the cabin, faster than any of us could track. It was humanoid, but twisted, elongated. Eyes, though I couldn't see them clearly, seemed to glint in the weak light of our flashlights. We froze. Silence engulfed the woods. Even the fire crackling seemed muted. Then the shadow darted toward the edge of the clearing. Without thinking, we ran, stumbling over roots, crashing through underbrush, hearts pounding in our ears. When we reached the main road, gasping and shaking, the first thing we noticed was the silence. The woods were unnaturally quiet. No crickets, no birds, nothing. Just a void where sound should have been. We made it back home that night, but none of us slept. That cabin, the shadow, the smell, it stayed with us. The next day, we tried to return, to show someone, anyone. But the forest seemed different. The path we had taken the previous night had vanished, overgrown as if it had never existed. Even the creek seemed shifted, deeper, wider, foreign. Weeks later, the local police investigated after someone reported strange lights in the area. They found the remains of a fire pit, old, decades old, but no cabins, no tracks, nothing that matched our memories. We never spoke of it again, at least not publicly. But every time the wind rustled through the trees near that forgotten creek, I felt watched, as if something had followed us, unseen, waiting. Weeks had passed since that first night in the abandoned woods, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. The shadows seemed thicker, the wind colder, and the forest calls, those soft whispers, lingered even when I was back in the safety of my neighborhood. Tom, Derek, and Leo claimed the same. At school, we exchanged uneasy glances whenever someone mentioned the creek or the old campsite. None of us dared go near it again. But curiosity, and maybe recklessness, had a grip we couldn't escape. One Friday evening, we decided to return, not to explore, but to prove to ourselves that it had all been imagination. We packed flashlights, extra batteries, and a few snacks. This time, our approach was more cautious. The path was familiar yet alien. The trees seemed taller, their branches clawing at the sky. Fog hung low, swirling around our ankles. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, made us jump. When we reached the clearing, the intact cabin from before loomed in the dim light of our flashlights. But something was different. The door, which had been closed, now hung ajar. The scratching sound from that first night was immediately present, soft but deliberate, coming from within. Derek whispered, We shouldn't go in." But Tom, as usual, pressed forward. I followed, heart racing. Inside, the air was thick, foul, and cloying. Dust and decay coated every surface. Then I saw it, the humanoid shadow, crouched in the far corner. Its limbs were unnaturally long, almost spider-like, and it moved with an eerie fluidity. Its head tilted toward us, the eyes, gleaming faintly like two embers in a dying fire, fixed on me. We froze. Every instinct screamed at us to run, but our bodies refused. Then came the sound, a low, guttural hiss, like air forced through a throat too small for its body. The shadow shifted closer, silently, as if gliding rather than walking. Tom tried to shout, but his voice caught in his throat. Derek stumbled backward, knocking over an old chair that crashed to the floor. The shadow reacted instantly, snapping toward the noise. In a heartbeat, it vanished into the darker corner of the cabin, leaving nothing but an echoing thud. We ran. Out of the cabin, out of the clearing. Branches tore at our faces. Roots tripped us. And all the while, we could hear it moving behind us. Soft, deliberate. Not quite on the ground, but always just out of reach. When we finally emerged from the forest, we didn't stop running until we reached Tom's house. Hearts pounding, lungs burning, drenched in sweat and fear. That night, none of us slept. Every creak in our houses, every shadow in our rooms felt like it was watching. And then, the text started. From unknown numbers. You shouldn't have come back. It saw you. It waits. We tried tracing them. Impossible. The numbers didn't exist. Our parents dismissed it as pranksters. But we all knew better. The following week, Derek's dog vanished. The leash was still attached to the porch, but the dog, gone. No tracks, no struggle, just gone. And then I saw it. For the first time, clearly. Standing at the edge of the woods behind my house, thin, elongated, head cocked, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. It didn't move. Didn't approach. At first. It simply watched. By the time I blinked, it was gone. We realized then that whatever we had encountered at the abandoned cabin had followed us home, and we were no longer just trespassers in its territory. It had come to claim ours. Days turned into restless nights. Sleep became a luxury none of us could afford. Every shadow, every gust of wind, every creak in the floor sounded like it moving through our homes. The forest creature had followed us beyond its old cabin, and now it seemed to be learning, observing, waiting. One evening, we decided to confront it, or at least, understand what we were dealing with. Armed with flashlights, baseball bats, and makeshift weapons, we returned to the woods, approaching the site cautiously. The fog had thickened, curling around tree trunks like living tendrils. The abandoned clearing stretched before us, silent but heavy. The cabin still stood, though somehow darker, more menacing than before. And then we saw the footprints, enormous, elongated, claw-like, pressed into the mud in ways human feet could never form. They led deeper into the forest, twisting and splitting as if the creature had doubled back on itself in impossible ways. We followed, hearts hammering. The deeper we went, the more unnatural the forest became. Trees bent in impossible angles. Shadows moved independently of the light, and always the feeling of eyes on our backs. Then it appeared. At first, it was just a flicker in the corner of my eye. Then, in the clearing ahead, I saw it fully. Taller than any human, limbs elongated and distorted, its head tilted unnaturally, eyes glowing faintly. Its skin, or whatever covered its body, was dark, absorbent of light, giving it a void-like quality. It moved without sound, gliding across the forest floor. And when it stopped, it tilted its head toward us, as if studying, calculating. Tom tried to speak, his voice trembling. We should leave. But I couldn't move. I was rooted in place, a mixture of fear and fascination holding me there. Then came the screech, a high-pitched, piercing sound, like metal scraping across stone, yet somehow alive. The creature lunged. Its speed was impossible. 1 second it was in the clearing, the next, it was right in front of me. I swung my bat. Missed. It was already past me, moving toward Derek. His scream cut through the night. We ran. Through the forest, branches clawing at our skin, roots tripping us, leaves slapping our faces. I heard it behind us, laughing, if you could call it that, an alien, inhuman sound that seemed to echo inside my skull. We burst from the forest edge, collapsing on the road, gasping for air, drenched in sweat and fear. But the worst was yet to come. The creature didn't stop. Over the next few nights, our homes were attacked, windows shattered, doors scratched, our pets vanished. And always, the messages. I see you. You can't hide. I am patient. We realized then that it wasn't just hunting us. It was learning. Every move we made, it adapted, predicting our patterns, our fears. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something older, something ancient. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. One night, Leo disappeared from his bedroom. No struggle. No sign. Just gone. A single message on his phone. Now I have all of you. We were left shattered, terrified, knowing that whatever we had awoken in that abandoned campsite had crossed the line from forest guardian or predator to something that hunted without mercy, something that would never stop. And even now, years later, I cannot walk near woods after dark without the sensation of being watched, followed, hunted. I know it still exists, and I know that if it wanted, it could find me anywhere. After Leo vanished, we knew we couldn't stay in our homes. None of us slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of a shadow, every whisper in the wind made our hearts pound. The creature wasn't just in the forest anymore. It had invaded our lives. We tried moving, tried leaving the city, even considered going far away. But the messages continued. You can run. You cannot hide. I will find you. We became prisoners of fear. Simple things, walking to school, going to the store, even stepping outside at night, became unbearable. Every step we took, every window we closed, every locked door felt like a challenge to it, a game that it always won. Months passed. Our group broke apart. We couldn't bear to talk to each other for fear that our conversations would reveal our hiding places. I moved across the country, changed my number, even altered my routine. Still, the nightmares came. I remember one night, vividly. I dreamt I was back in the abandoned woods, the fog curling around my ankles, the branches reaching for me. The creature stood at the edge of the clearing, towering, eyes glowing like coals in the dark. I ran, but no matter how fast I moved, it stayed just behind me, silent, relentless. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, shaking so violently I could barely hold the phone in my hands. Even now, years later, I carry that fear with me. I've told this story to very few people because they would call me insane, but I know what I saw. I know what it felt like to be hunted by something that wasn't human, something that waited, calculated, and struck without warning. Sometimes, when I walk near a patch of woods, I pause, heart hammering, listening. And in the distance, I swear I see a figure, tall, elongated, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, watching, waiting. And I know, deep down, that it's still out there, patient, patient as ever. I've learned to live with the fear, to never walk alone near woods at night, to check behind me constantly, to never ignore the shadows. To never ignore the shadows, because whatever it is, it remembers, and one day, it will come for me again.